I'm sitting there thinking, wow, you must all be so confused at this point. Like your heads must be spinning, right? Well, hopefully I don't confuse you more and I make things clear. So in the past, I've spoken here many times about various different topics and covered things in, I guess, an objective way. And I'm going to talk more specifically today about my technique, again, another technique. And it's been based on 27 years of experience in this one procedure. So it's going to be a little hard to get it down into 10 minutes, but I think I'll do a good job with it. So I'm going to move this over a little bit. Circumferential solution for circumferential disease. Maximize the results of lipedema. Uh-oh, hope I pressed the right button. There it is. Okay. So I still have no disclosures. I'm almost a little envious of those that have disclosures, like the last speaker. I have none. So I have spent 27 years focusing on this one procedure of liposuction in my practice. Every day I'm in the operating room doing things to perfect my results in this one procedure, and designing things and engineering things and methods. And this talk goes into a lot of that, but again, it's hard to get across in 10 minutes. Liposuction surgery itself is very specific. It really is. And I think that more respect should be given to it just by itself. It's so much more than just sucking out fat. And with lipedema, you've got so many things to deal with. Constantly, fibrosis and this and that. But methods, design, technique is also very important. I'm a board-certified dermatologic surgeon since 1995. Again, 27 years on this one procedure, liposuction surgery, complicated revision surgery. I truly began to do this procedure over 25 years ago on lipedema patients when nobody was doing it. So I really had to pioneer and figure out ways of going about this. And surgery is very intuitive, and that, along with my skills and this and that, is how I develop my processes. I have done between 4 and probably close to 5,000 lipedema surgeries itself over 27 years. My practice currently is dedicated to lipedema. I have trained select surgeons from around the world in my technique. I don't do that anymore. I realized years ago that it's just impossible, quite honestly. It takes a long time. It's not something you're going to learn in a weekend or a week. Karen Ashworth said that very well with quadrivus, a non-surgical technique. It takes years of apprenticeship to master the ways of going about this. I play guitar. I played for 50 years. I'm a really good guitarist. I take a lot of pride in how I play guitar. But to get that level of being a real master, it takes years and years and years of refinement and perfection of that technique with things. So currently, I'll introduce Dr. Aria Zernia back there. He spent the greater part of a year every day with me in the operating room learning my technique, every single method of it. I have it designed and engineered to a real particular process. So these are other organizations you'll see me associated with, the treatment program that I have, Lipedema Society. I'm developing a lecture series on lipedema that'll be released. It covers various different topics in a very understood way. That's a whole library of information. I do have a comprehensive program, like many of us do, at my center, the Roxbury Institute, all the different aspects of lipedema care. It's made it here. I didn't think I can put that in the CMA talk. So I have a book coming out on liposculpture surgery. It's entitled A Guide for the Patient and also Pearls for the Surgeon. This was another thing that wasn't supposed to be on there. The goals of properly done lipedema surgery, and I've said this for years, there are two main goals. The number one goal, of course, is the maximum disease treatment and prevention with the lipedema surgery. And just as a side, with fat removal, that whole discussion about how much to remove and all the safety, my average is between 5 and 6 liters per surgery. And like the last presenter, I've removed certainly much more than that. Commonly it's 9 to 10, and my maximum is 12.4 liters. Second part is the maximum reduction of fibrosis with the surgery too. That's so important, and even more important in certain patients, how the fibrosis is dealt with. There are a number of different patterns of fibrosis. Now is not the right time to get into it. It's not only just nodules. There's a dense pattern, there's a granular pattern, there's a strandy pattern, and the surgeon understanding those different patterns and how to maximize the treatment of fibrosis is very important. And of course, It should also be about maximum cosmetic improvement. It's not just only about disease treatment. I've talked about this. There's a spectrum. Some patients care primarily about cosmetics. Some patients that can't walk or stage 4 patients, obviously it's less important to them. But they really go hand in hand. It's not like one versus another. You should get maximum disease treatment and maximum cosmetic improvement. So I used to use the word philosophy in terms of how I go about things. I've realized that term is not strong enough. I now use the word principles because there are principles that I function with underneath that I've really defined with liposuction surgery. And we're going to run through these principles, and there's techniques that are also things that I have developed. Principles, they're important principles: balance of proportion, the cosmetic unit, the circumferential approach, which we'll talk about, understanding what I call the safe plane, otherwise things happen that are not good things. And finally, the concept of a defined treatment plan. Techniques, we'll talk about the anesthesia and the uses of different types of anesthesia briefly, the markings and designs of how you go about doing things, the incision points, and then the tools, which is really the least important part of things. I agree with, I think Dr. Kukowski said that. They really are just tools in an artist's hands. Balance of proportion, let's start with this. Every patient, lipedema or not, should be evaluated from the neck to the feet to target disproportion to create overall balance proportion with liposuction surgery. I've been saying this for over 20 years, and this is even outside of lipedema patients. Liposuction should target disproportion. In a cosmetic patient, it's due to genetic disproportion. In lipedema patients, it's due to patterns of a disease. If this principle is not respected, you can create disproportion in the cosmetic patient and certainly in lipedema too. BMI, I could talk a whole talk about this. It's something I've said for years also. I don't like BMIs. BMIs are an archaic way of looking at the body. It's over 200 years old, characterizing weight and height, and it leads patients down to wrong treatment plans many times. I don't pay attention to BMI. I don't want to get into discussions about this also, but I think it's actually not a good way of looking at lipedema patients and treating BMIs. Cosmetic unit, a very important concept that one should be paying attention to. Lipedema involves entire cosmetic units. This is something that distinguishes lipedema. When it's involved, it wraps completely every single aspect of the cosmetic unit. The cosmetic unit needs to be respected in its entirety, both from a disease treatment standpoint and a cosmetic standpoint. So this is a little diagram from my book about the different cosmetic units and how they're broken up and how I approach things. The circumferential approach, well, again, lipedema is a disproportionate circumferential disease involving entire cosmetic units with predictable patterns of distribution. It involves fat, fibrosis, and swelling. I've also said this for years too. The word lipedema is a little bit weak. I think that's why it never made it into our medical Rolodex of information in medical school. I've suggested the term lipofibroedema, which is a little bit more accurate in terms of what's going on. So Karen, I put a vote in for that term in terms of if we ever change the term. Circumferential, I do this in 95% of patients. I triage which ones I do circumferentially, which ones are a semi-circumferential approach, where I then will connect it. Those are in more advanced stage 3 or 4 lipolymphedema patients that are not going to tolerate a circumferential approach, but 95% of the time it is completely circumferential. Circumferential means every single millimeter. So those might be, people might say they're doing circumferential, but I mean every single millimeter of that cosmetic unit 100%. Nothing is left behind. It's done completely and uniformly. It's not spot treating or debulking, nor is it the anterior, posterior approach where we flip people over. The safe plane, another hugely important concept. If liposuction is about targeting a subcutaneous layer of fat and staying with that safe plane with the skin and muscle. If you disrespect the skin from underneath, you get irregularities. If you disrespect deeper things, bad things happen. Muscle, trauma, nerves, tendons, bleeding compartments, organs, they've all been bagged, lung, liver, vena cava, and then the aspect of lymphatic damage, which I'm not going to get into now, with the deeper branches and trunks. The treatment plan, again, you have to have a defined treatment plan when you go into the surgery. The fewest number of surgeries possible. On average, mine is 2 to do a complete correction. Strategic grouping, we can get a whole discussion about this, how I group things strategically. It's not just like, oh, let's just approach it this way, or even necessarily what just bothers the patient. There's ways you group things strategically in things. And then the interval between surgeries, generally a month or more for the full surgeries, and as close as 2 days. Cheyenne's looking at me already. Avoiding general anesthesia, a lot of discussion about that. I do it in 1% of patients, general anesthesia, so I do use it. Generally, it's done at twilight with an anesthesiologist or local anesthesia. Safety, recovery, but mostly results with patient positioning. That's the most important thing. Design and markings, incision points, hugely important. My book goes into this in terms of how I design things and how I break the calves and ankles into triads, the thighs into quadrants, the arms into triads, the forearms into I bisect them. Incision points, always at the periphery. I never place my incision points within the cosmetic unit. Multi-step approach, again, tools aren't the most important thing. First step is to mess. That is the proper terminology, to mess into anesthesia. Do it completely, not just a wet technique. You completely prepare bloodless field, you hydrodissect completely before I start any work. That's what really leads to pure fat removal, and you get a less bloody result. First step, PAL is a good tool. I agree with everybody. PAL mechanically releases very, very well. But that step is very important, how you do it evenly and completely. And you can break up all the nodules with that very, very well if you know how to use PAL with it. I do use Vaser. I don't like doing things unnecessarily. It's a lot of work. But I do use it in almost all patients to further emulsify after I do the first two steps. And I emulsify the area under the skin. You get a smooth skin surface when you do that properly and completely. So Vaser, for the last several years, is part of my tool box. Fine sculpting, after that, you go back in with sculpting in different directions and perfect your sculpting. And then I don't want to get in a discussion about skin tightening and how I use J plasma still and body tight. But again, as a tool, we use it safely. I've done it in almost 1,000 patients without one single complication with it. So I can answer more questions about why I continue to use it. Some obligatory before and afters. This is a patient you guys have probably all seen. I bring this up because this was done before PAL, before Vaser, before anything else, just well done liposuction circumferentially with perfection and proper technique. Sorry, Cheyenne. Other results. Almost an 80-year-old patient, look at the smoothness of her skin, just liposuction alone, no tightening, no surgical tightening procedure. Again, before and after stage 2 patient, just some calf and ankle stuff. And I want to thank you. This is my wife and my brood in last summer in Tahiti. Thank you so much.